Welcome back to A Fresh Story, the podcast where we have conversations about brave decisions to start over again. I'm Olivia.
And I'm Jenny, and we're so glad you're here today.
Hello, everybody. So, you may notice that I am a solo act today. And that is because at the time that we recorded this episode, my co-host and co-founder and little sister had the audacity to go ahead and get married and was not available for this episode's recording because we often book these episodes like 6 months in advance, especially with somebody who's on a book tour like L'Oreal is or was at the time of this recording. So we brought in a friend of the pod, Mr. Rob Abney, to co-host with me on this episode, as you'll hear. Rob was on 2 different episodes of A Fresh Story. We have known him forever. It was an amazing conversation with L'Oreal. Now, I'm going to tell you a little secret. So L'Oreal is the author of this fantastic book, Stop Waiting for Perfect, which we talk a lot about on the podcast. And I am a perfectionist, and we switched podcasting recording platforms the last couple months, and I told myself I would learn this whole new platform over the summer, and then guess what Olivia didn't do. So this episode, as you may hear, because it is our first one recorded on the new platform, has some slight timing glitches. And the perfectionist in me is really struggling with this because it doesn't sound perfect. And everything I like to put into the world, I want that to sound perfect. But after listening to what L'Oreal talked about with her book and her manifesto and her mission statement with stop waiting for perfect and do it messy and show up and all that stuff, I took it to heart. And I'm releasing this episode because I didn't want to keep fussing with it. It was such a beautiful conversation. So I want to just invite you to show up a little bit messy and not perfect today, because I did. And that was really a struggle for me. But as you will learn in this conversation, then that is the most important thing we can do, is put aside our perfection and just show up, as we talk about with L'Oreal and her amazing book. So if you hear a timing glitch, there's some things that don't exactly line up the tracks wise. Just ignore it and pretend it's not there, because it's okay. Just focus on the conversation. Take a listen to this conversation with L'Oreal. And Jenny, we miss you. And please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to A Fresh Story so that we can keep telling fresh start stories. L'Oreal Thompson Payton is the author of Stop Waiting for Perfect, Step Out of Your Comfort Zone and Into Your Power. Her work has appeared in outlets such as Bustle, Essence, Self, and Well and Good, just to name a few. As a writer, L'Oreal expertly blends refreshingly confessional career and life advice with inspirational insight and just the right amount of humor. She does this by authentically and vulnerably sharing her lessons learned and imperfections while bringing her readers along with her on the journey. And I came across you first on Twitter. And I just love everything you do and everything you post. And actually, as I'm reading your bio, I'm thinking Rob might be like the male version of you. I feel like there's a lot of synchronicity here.
How's it going today?
It's good. It's finally fall weather here in Chicago. And that's my season. I thrive. October is my birth month. I'm a Scorpio, spooky season all the way, pumpkin spice, everything. I'm in my element. So I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm great. Fall is also my month, and my birthday is next week, so we are getting closer and closer to each other.
Yeah, we really are twins. Separated at birth.
So close.
Guys, you'll see. You're very similar. I'm excited. It was kismet. Well, we're really excited to have you here. Let's just jump into it. Can you take us back to the beginning of your fresh start story?
Well, it's very timely because my most recent fresh start, I have had many throughout my life and career, but as of beginning of September, I am now a full-time freelance writer again. And so I've done it. There's been lots of stops and starts throughout the last 3 years, honestly, since 2020. It's when I last left my last full-time job, but now recently left Fortune as a health and wellness reporter and getting back to I like to call it my editorial roots. I started off as a freelance writer in 2008, a lot by force rather than choice, because I graduated into a recession. For my fellow elder millennials out there who can empathize. And back then I feel like I really put the free in freelancing, with, just like exposure and all those other things. And now I tell like every young person, don't do that. Be smarter and wiser. But I'm excited for this fresh start. I'm a newly published author. My book Stop Waiting for Perfect came out in August, and I'm still, very much doing the book tour and the book launch and a lot of different speaking engagements for that. And it feels right. It feels timely. It feels like this is very much like a me season and stepping into my power, like literally taking my own advice and what I've shared with people in the book and living myself, because it's not enough to, talk the talk and write the book. I'm very much into walking the walk as well. And that's what I'm doing currently.
So take us back. Where
I
did you
grew
grow
up
up?
outside of Baltimore, Maryland, in very quiet neighborhood.
Okay.
Went through Catholic school my entire life, literally from kindergarten to college, and was very much like the shy, awkward Black girl before that was like a cool thing to do and be. And so I remember vividly growing up, and I write in the book also about my love of writing. Like there's a picture of me and my sister. We're 3.5 years apart. So, and in this picture, I think maybe I'm 4 and she's 6 months, but I have this spiral bound notebook on my lap, a pen in my hand, and it looks like I'm interviewing her, like maybe, like early version of a journalist me. And I love writing. I love reading was like my first love, and writing as an extension of that, because then I realized I could create my own worlds and stories. And when I was 6, I tell the story about writing a book called Dinosaurs in Outer Space. And it was literally about dinosaurs in outer space. I illustrated it as well. And that moment was very pivotal for me, because I remember writing it during the day. It was like over the summer, and my dad came to pick me and my sister up from my grandparents' house and asked, well, what did you do today? And I was like, Daddy, look, I wrote this book. And he was like, cool, like add it to the reading list for the summer reading challenge, at the library. And I was like, but I'm not a real writer. Like I'm not an author. I'm just a kid. And his reasoning, which I couldn't argue with, was, well, if you wrote it, then you read it. And so it counts, and it's like enough. And that was very monumental for me, because I was terrified going to the library, and like, I thought for sure it was going to be like this Christmas Story moment where they're like, you'll shoot your eye out. But instead of that, it's like, you're not an author. And I was going to have like my library card and privileges revoked, because they realized that the name on the card was the same as the name on the, like 6-year-old me was very much just like, this is going to be a disaster. Literally worst case scenario. Like I couldn't imagine anything worse for like me, like being a little reader and having my library card taken away. But that did not happen. I don't even think the librarian noticed, but that was the first time that I was like, oh, I'm a writer. Like I can write, I can tell stories. And it evolved as I got older, because in middle school, I was very much obsessed with teen magazines. And this was the 99 and the 2000s, right? So it was very much Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera. And I was like, well, I don't have blonde hair and big boobs and blue eyes. So where does that leave me? Like I felt very much a lot of internalized self-hate as well, because I, remember this is before Black Girl Magic was a hashtag, before Black Lives Matter was a movement. The representation and diversity that we see now in media didn't really exist back then, or at least in the magazines that I was reading. And so I felt very isolated, felt very lonely. Like remember vividly praying to God to make me white so that I would be beautiful, like in 7th grade. And again, always been a writer, journaled a lot to get my feelings and thoughts out on paper. But when I got to high school and I was the editor-in-chief of my student newspaper, I realized that my words can not only help me, but they can help others. Like I would write a monthly column, and I talked about everything from body image to self-defense and like all of these things that kind of drove the nuns mad. I went to an all-girl Catholic high school, so was a little bit of a feminist rebel back then, as one does. And that's when I decided, like, okay, I want to be a journalist. I want to be a writer. I want to use my words to help other people, but specifically help Black women and girls feel less alone. I just didn't want anyone else to feel the way that I did reading those magazines. And I knew that writing was my superpower and like my gift to the world and the best way that I knew how to go about doing that. But spoiler, I never made it to editor-in-chief of Teen Magazine, so pour one out for that dream.
Yeah, you're doing great things anyway. Yeah, there's so much time.
But I feel like I read in a book too about how, actually from a work friend that I worked with when I was at Jet and Ebony, and he told me, it was like, the mission stays the same, but the method can change. So my mission always been uplifting, encouraging, inspiring Black women and girls. The way that that has manifested itself has taken different shape throughout the years. First in my work as a journalist, then when I worked in nonprofit PR and communications, then when I came back to journalism, and now as an author and a speaker. And so I haven't lost sight of that purpose, but the way that it has shown up in my life has certainly changed throughout the course of my career.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how you just worded all that, because when you started off with the escape side of it, right? Having your own, building your own world that you can live in, that you can kind of manage and it be yours. And it's almost like you were prepping for, whether it's self-consciously or on purpose, you were prepping for what you were going to do in the future. Do you look back at that and go, oh yeah, like especially when you got into high school and started writing, you're like, oh, I've been doing this for years.
It's very timely, because literally last week I was back home and I was giving the keynote address at my school, and I was honestly shocked that they asked me, because I was like, y'all remember, like, I got in trouble for saying big butts when I was talking about like Beyonce and J-Lo back in 2004. Are you sure? Are you sure you want me? And I joked, but I was very serious. Like, that was the start of my editorial career. That was where I forged my way as a journalist. I mean, I think around the same time that I wrote the Dinosaurs in Outer Space book, there's also this mini magazine or newspaper I wrote at my other grandparents' house. So I was just writing all over the place. And like, look at that. And now, you know, having been a career journalist now for 15 years, and it's very interesting because my dad was the same way. There's a picture of him when he was a kid playing with a fire truck, and he became a career firefighter, did that for 30 plus years. And so I feel very lucky in that regard, that I've more or less figured it out pretty early on, and stayed true to that mission or that goal that I had in mind. But back then it was like, I was writing because I like to read. And so I just, I think sheer necessity created my own words to read. But then got even more fortunate as I got older and realized that the power that words have and how they can help others as well.
Did you ever feel like a friction within that identity when you were going through like different
Absolutely.
periods of your life?
My middle school and elementary school was predominantly Black. And I am also Black, in case you couldn't tell. So there's on the outside this sense of community, and we're all the same, right? But I was a little bit different. I was also nerdy. I was very much into my books. I skipped a grade, and that definitely didn't help my popularity. And while everyone else was like listening to Tupac and Biggie, I was blasting NSYNC and Britney Spears, and they said, quote, I talked white. I was called an Oreo because I was Black on the outside and white on the inside. I lived in the suburbs, and a lot of my classmates lived in the city, like in Baltimore City. And so there was a lot of otherness, even though I was surrounded by people who looked like me. And so it was interesting then going to my high school, an all-girl Catholic school, and being one of 2 Black girls in the whole class, but feeling like more of myself there, because I remember vividly at orientation, and they do, you know, like the little icebreakers and everything like that. And I turned around to the girl who was behind me, and I was like, NSYNC or Backstreet Boys? Because that's the kind of person that I was. And she was like,
which one, by the way? Which one?
I'm an NSYNCer through and through.
Okay.
And I can acknowledge, that boys, or as I'll say, Boy Scouts, where did that come from? Backstreet Boys is the more vocally talented group. I can admit that. And even within NSYNC, I started off as a JC fan, and I lost my way. I got distracted by ramen hair Justin, and I converted. And I now know the errors of my ways, and I can go back and admit that JC is the more vocally talented. Justin had the career that JC deserved. And that's a whole nother podcast. But
That sounds like your next book. That
I
sounds
know.
like it could be
I have time for that one as I watch the Meow Mix
Yeah.
commercials with my daughters.
So that's an aside. But yeah, I was very NSYNC, Britney Spears, and didn't fit in. But when I got to high school, I met other girls, these white girls who, of course, also like NSYNC and Britney Spears. And when we got older, I remember that same girl who became a good friend. But then she was like, yeah, I remember that moment. And I thought you were going to say like rap music or something, which I didn't realize at the time, like microaggression. And because I didn't know what microaggression meant. There was so much that I didn't know back then that, of course, I can reflect back on now. But as I write in the book as well, that time in high school, before Black Girl Magic, like Beyonce still in Destiny's Child. Actually, she debuted her solo album my junior year. I remember in 2003. But it was still before like Michelle was First Lady and all these other things. So there wasn't, again, as much of that mainstream representation. Because I also love Brandy and Monica, but they weren't on the cover of Teen People and YM and Cosmo Girl and things like that. And I remember trying to purposely distance myself from those other Black girls because I was smart and I was intelligent and well-spoken. And so I'm not like those girls. And again, going back to that internalized self-hate. And as I got older, I realized we're all the same girl. We're all Black girls. And there's very different versions of what it means to be a Black girl. But I think back then there was this very singular stereotype that I didn't fit. And so I didn't want to because it was a negative stereotype. And so it was just like a lot to unpack there.
That's really interesting.
Rob, I would love to hear your perspective, Rob, because
because we kind of had this, we had this conversation. I think mine is probably 2 years delayed from yours, and based in Long Island, New York, as opposed to Baltimore. But actually, you said like the idea of not fitting in. I think I was lucky because I was 6'4" and I played sports, so no one. Well, within reason, no one ever said anything to my face. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because most of my bouts were internal, just how I assumed people felt, how I assumed what people were saying. And so my entire world was based on that. Because on the outside, everyone loved me, right? I could morph and go into these different communities and be whoever I needed to be, which as I get older, helps one in being able to navigate the professional world, but it definitely has its negative effects long term. But even as I have my two girls, and you talk about different shades, they're different shades and they live together, right? And they have different kinds of hair, and they're both very strong, but in different ways. And my Lou, who's lighter, she's the one who is so intrigued by race and was talking to me the other day about microaggressions and what they actually mean, because she reads books about race, and she's very into the past and knowing where I come from, not just where her mom comes from. And it's an interesting conversation to have, because I didn't actually have it when I was her age. It just like we all just went our separate ways and we did our things, and my mom never really was intrigued and my dad wasn't there, right? And so these thoughts, I didn't really have to work them out. I got to live in my naivety and just grow up as I wanted to. And as I get older now, I am having those conversations and having those thoughts and looking at them as we live in a predominantly white neighborhood, wondering what they're thinking and what they're feeling, because I never said it out loud. So we actually do talk about it more, so that we understand where they are in their day, which I think is very important. The idea of back then, if it was Beyonce and all of us were on the darker side, then where do we actually fit within that conversation, right? Brandy, I remember those days, the boys' mind, how popular that was, but you didn't see Brandy or Monica on any of those stations because they didn't fit that mold, right? So it's interesting that you kind of live your life by what was popular in that era.
You went to college, I assumed, before writing.
So because this is how my brain works, I majored in communications and specialized in journalism, got a minor in Spanish, but my thought process at the time was like, even then I knew that media is a very volatile industry. And so I wanted to make sure I had something else, like essentially a backup plan in case it didn't work out. And so although I concentrated in journalism, was also part of the newspaper, all of my internships were editorial. I broadened it with some communications courses and PR, which I did tap into. As I said earlier, I transitioned to a career in nonprofit PR and communications, but journalism has a hold on me. And so I came back. I don't know. I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess.
And then when did the book come? Like where, because the book is that book, right? Stop Waiting for Perfect is really like it's a mission statement, right? So where did that come from? Because that obviously had to start somewhere years back from when the book was actually
the first
published.
iteration, I remember in 2015 is when I first had the idea for a book. It wasn't necessarily this book, but the working title and the Google Doc that has since been abandoned was the Millennial Manual. And it was like all of these lessons and very much of 2015 in that girl boss era. So I was talking about switching careers. I had just left journalism and I was working for the local school system in the communications department. Really wanted to do nonprofit for girls, but this was kind of a bridge to that way into that world. And was honestly bored at work. And that's when I came up with the idea and started the Google Doc. And since then it evolved in many different ways. And 2017 is when I was like, okay, I really want to write a book. Like I want to write a book, a self-help book. And because I very much believe in that Toni Morrison quote, she says, if there's a book you want to read that hasn't been written yet, you have to write it. And I took that to heart. And came up with Trust Your Dopeness was the original title of Stop Waiting for Perfect. And I loved it too until I realized that it was, copyright by someone else. And so I was like, okay, I need to, let's get back to the drawing board.
But that's so interesting though. Cause the Google Doc, right. Just to go back for a second, the Google Doc for what you say, the Millennial Manual, that is like your version of a teen magazine.
Yes. Ooh, I like that. Maybe we revisit that in some point. I don't know. Well, now millennials are old and we're not trendy anymore and no one cares about us. It's all about Gen Z.
The tired Millennial Manual, but like,
we moved on.
But that, I mean, cause it sounds like what you were going to put in there is all the same things you would read in Glamour and Cosmo, right?
Oh yeah.
Very similar.
I had dreams. My senior project from Loyola, like my capstone project was a teen version of Essence. I called it Essence Girl. And so, like what happens to a dream deferred? Well, it becomes like a blog and a newsletter and then a book. The evolution. Yeah.
Yes,
but,
I love that.
I wrote the book proposal in 2017. I bought Jen Sincero's nonfiction book proposal course because I'm stubborn and I wanted to very much go the traditional publishing route. I think it's the journalist in me and something about the credibility of having a traditional book deal behind you. But then the perfectionist in me like got a hold because I realized many years later on that procrastination is a form of perfectionism. And at the time I wanted to write this book about overcoming imposter syndrome. And back then it wasn't the trendy topic that it is now, like there's a million different articles and books and such. But back then it was still kind of like, it wasn't new because the term itself originated back in the early 70s for these psychologists, Susan Imes and Pauline Clance. And so like concept not new, but hadn't heard about it from the perspective of a Black woman. And so I was like, I'm onto something here. Fast forward to 2018. And so the proposal process, for those who aren't familiar, you write for a nonfiction book, the outline, essentially a few sample chapters, and put together this proposal. And then you query literary agents who are then the ones that shop your book around to the publishers. Very long-winded process because even when you get the deal, it's about 18 to 24 months from the deal to publication. So in early 2018, I'm querying agents after I've procrastinated and actually writing the book proposal itself and met with rejection every step of the way. They're like, well, come back. I remember one vividly who told me, she was like, I like your voice. I think this is a really important topic and come back when you have 20,000 followers. And I was like, because at the time, I think I had about 5 or 6 across platforms. And that's the other thing about nonfiction. If you're not a celebrity or a politician or major influencer, like they don't really care. And so it took a lot of perseverance to push past that. A lot of stops and starts. I had signed with 2 other agents before landing with the one I'm with currently. And that's something people also don't talk a lot about very candidly in publishing, is sometimes you have to fire or break up with your literary agent, which was scary because I was like, well, these other people have already said yes. And if I don't find someone else, then this dream of mine isn't going to come true, which is very much, like scarcity mindset thinking. And I had to push past that because I didn't believe in settling for less. Like I believed in myself in my book, and I needed someone who was going to also believe in me and the book and shop it out in the world. And we did find a publisher in 2021, then realized that the previous title was under copyright. And I say all that to say, it was not an overnight process, right? This was many, many years in the making, a lot of rejection that came along, a lot of stops and starts. And I always knew it was a possibility that the title could change because that's publishing and, it shit happens. But what I'm excited about though, is I feel like the current title, like Stop Waiting for Perfect, is much more of this moment, right? Like Trust Your Dopeness was 2017, 2018 me. And a lot has changed in both my life and the world since then. Hello, global pandemic. So it's only natural then that the book and its content evolve with me. And so it was like, yes, still imposter syndrome, self-doubt and that sort of thing. But I also started to realize how much perfectionism was playing a role in that in my life, and even in the course of writing the book. And so it all feels, it worked out the way that it was supposed to, even if it was a really long,
Of course it did. Of course it did.
Yeah.
No, and that's so important that to talk about it, right? Because people have these dreams and they want to be a writer and they want to get a book published. And again, I feel like there's still a lot of people who are not talking about the book publishing world. So I appreciate your honesty and your candid conversation about it. So for anybody listening, can you give us like a little description of what the book is about?
Stop Waiting for Perfect is a love letter to all of the overachievers, all the highly ambitious people out there, all the recovering and aspiring perfectionists, because I don't even put myself in the recovering camp. I'm still, I'm working on it. I'm unlearning 30 plus years of perfectionism. So it's not, it doesn't happen overnight. And it's this permission slip to stop waiting for the perfect moment in your life to do the thing that you dream of doing, whether that's writing a book, launching a podcast, switching careers, like breaking up with your partner of 10 plus years or whatever, if that's no longer serving you, right? Like we get into our mind that, okay, if I have all my ducks in a row, if I wait for this perfect moment, then I will be guaranteed success or whatever outcome it is that you're looking for and hoping for. But if you wait for that perfect moment, you will literally be waiting for the rest of your life, because that moment does not exist, right? And you'll get to months, years, decades later down the road and look back with regret, like, oh, I wish I had done this. I wish I had started that project and saw someone else doing it and got in your head about it and everything. So it's just like, stop waiting for that perfect moment. Do it now. Do it messy. Do it imperfect, because you can always change. You can always make it better. You can always pivot. But if you don't start now, you're going to be waiting forever, and that's no way to live.
And it's interesting. So like, going back when you talk about like the stopping and starting, the rejections, the pivoting, there's all those micro fresh starts in there. And I know looking back on it, it's very easy to consolidate a 2-year process into a 4-minute speech, right? And gloss over the feelings that came with rejection. But I'm curious on, and as you were navigating that whole space, taking book titles, having to fire agents and find new ones, like that, when that doubt crept in, how did you overcome that?
My inner critic is very loud. In the book, I've named her Negative Nancy, and there's been many instances where I've had to tell her to pipe down. And one of the exercises that I share is writing a breakup letter to your inner critic. Like, they mean well, their intentions are very good. They want to protect you and keep you safe and in your comfort zone. But what we know is that the magic does not happen in the comfort zone. You have to push past that in order to achieve, like your wildest dreams. And I do that to myself on a regular basis. Like, and it's not a one and done, like, okay, I did that once and I can move on with the rest of my life and everything is rainbows and roses. Like, no, especially now being a published author, doing speaking engagement, podcast interviews. I was very, like, the day before the book came out, was on CBS Mornings, and I had never been on any TV before then, let alone a national TV program with Gayle King. Like, hello. And there was right.
The queen.
I was getting my makeup done and she came in to check on me like the amazing person that she is, and was like, well, is Negative Nancy in the building with us now? And I was like, yes, ma'am, she is. I 100%. Right.
That's a
Like
great
I had to
story.
talk myself down. And in that moment, what I did was like steal away a moment for myself and listen to Beyonce. Diva and Formation are like my go-tos to hype myself up. Everyone should have a pump up, like hype yourself up playlist. And Beyonce is pretty much my whole playlist, but some breathing techniques to calm myself down, like center myself, ground myself.
Right.
And it feels very silly when you talk about it, but doing it, the striking a power pose and it's like feet hips width apart and hands on your hip and Wonder Woman, striking that Wonder Woman pose, really helped me push past the self-doubt and the inner critic that was very loud in that moment to go on stage and like do my best. And it wasn't perfect. I look back at it now and I was like, oh, I would have answered this differently, or I stumbled over that word, things that no one else notices because we're our own worst critics. It can be very harsh on ourselves, but yeah, in those moments, and also reminding myself of all of the awesome things that I've done. Like I've done interviews before. I am a journalist. I, like do this, like the writing part for a living and talking about it. So just kind of reminding myself as well. I call it my feel goods folder. I go back and look at notes that people have sent me throughout the years, screenshots of DMs and texts and that sort of thing where people have thanked me for what I've written and how it has helped them. And I go back to those to remind myself, okay, this is why you're doing what you're doing. And also as proof, as evidence that I've done it before. And so you can do it again.
Oh, it's interesting. So are your milestone moments that you remember, and I was having this conversation with someone else a couple of days ago, are they the big things like the book being published, like being on CBS Morning, or is it the small things that no one else sees? So the someone writing in and saying how it touched them or how it changed their lives.
It's like the both and, but I think the little moments, I remember when I got the advanced copies of the book and it had been like a shit day, week, month, maybe even. Like it was just like a lot going on. We were getting ready to go out of town and I was like, a lot of authors do an unboxing video and I didn't want to because I wasn't in the mood, but I still wanted to like capture the moment for just, like my memory's sake. And I turned and I was like opening it and I took the book out, but then my daughter took it and went to her little chair and sat down to read it, upside down, of course, as toddlers are wont to do. But I remember that moment in particular because it was this manifestation of these two goals that I had worked for so many years toward. Our fertility journey was very long-winded. We had multiple IVF cycles to get to her, and it all happened at the same time. Like got the positive pregnancy finally, and then like a few months later the book deal. And so it was like, you're working, and then it's like when it rains it pours. These different blessings for which I'm very grateful. And it was very overwhelming to write and revise a book while taking care of a newborn, and then like as she got older, and it's just different challenges, different stages of parenthood. But that moment of seeing her with the book, I was like, wow, like that really happened. And then recently, back home, I did a book event at my hometown library. And so now my family is there and my dad is in the audience and I'm telling the story about dinosaurs in outer space and crying and he's crying and we're all crying because it was just like, so those moments, for me, it's like, yes, CBS was great and these other different kind of milestones, but those little moments are so meaningful to me because they just like, it's the manifestation of everything and years of hard work, and just being able to share it with the people that I love has been really, really exciting.
Yeah, not quite a close, because I never liked the full circle, but a full loop. Right, because it keeps going after the fact. That loop sounds awesome. I
literally just wrote this week's newsletter was about the full circle moment, going back to my high school and being the keynote speaker. And I remember right before they dismissed the girls, it was at the end of the day, someone turned to me and was like, they're going to swarm you. And literally that's what happened. And someone captured a picture of it. And I think back to when I was there, one of two Black girls in the graduating class, and I don't know how many are in the senior class now, but there is this picture of about 9 to 12 of them literally circling me. And like that, and I'm like getting emotional even thinking about it now because of like what that moment meant in particular, and having started my editorial career there. And so, the loop, I like the loop.
No, it's very big. I get it. It's very big. Like
it's emotional.
it's a weird place to be because, like, for me, like, you knew what you wanted to do. I fell into marketing, right? And even now, it's the marketing stuff I know how to do, and I have fun doing it. But it's the people aspect of it, of coaching and sharing information and seeing how it goes out there. And it's been a strange journey for marketing as a Black person, because Black culture pushes marketing, yet you never see, or now you can do more, but you never saw Black executives in those posts, right? So we were good enough to create the content, create the vibe, not good enough to manage it. And so
It's
to
like
now
Blackish.
have the title that, right, to have that title and have been chasing a title for my youth years, and now realize it doesn't really mean much. But for other folks, it does, because they see themselves when I have to do a speech or I get to sit and talk to folks, and they don't have to think about being the actor in that. They can actually run the show and manage the budgets and hire the folks. And it's an aha moment for me sometimes of I didn't have anyone to say I want to be like that when I grow up. But not that anyone's saying they want to be like me when they grow up, but they do have a face that they can put to a title and strive for something, which I think is extremely important.
Absolutely.
And that must be very powerful to have your daughter, right? And like that is the manifestation of everything you've been working towards since you were a child, right? I do think you should publish Dinosaurs in Outer Space.
That would be amazing.
Absolutely. That should be the next book. Tell your publisher that. I love all of that. So if somebody's going through a fresh start, what would be some wise words you could impart to them?
Do it now, do it messy, do it imperfect, feel the fear and do it anyway. That fear is not going to go anywhere. Again, if you're waiting for that perfect moment, it doesn't exist. And what really helped me was, honestly, as I was writing the first draft of the book and I saw a tweet that was like, you can edit bad, but you can't edit nothing. And that gave me, as a perfectionist, this permission, like, okay, my job is just to put words on a page. My editor and I will work together to make it into a really great book at this final product. But right now, it just matters that there's words on a page. And so you can always change, you can reiterate, you can fix something, but there won't be anything to fix and improve and make better if you don't start in the first place. And so it's giving yourself that permission slip again, do it now, do it imperfect, do it messy, because someone else is waiting on you. Also, like there's that element of it as well. Like someone needs to hear your story. Someone needs to take your yoga class. Someone else needs to, benefit from this product that you've been working on. And if you are constantly waiting until you have all your ducks in a row, you're not only doing yourself a disservice, but the world as well.
I love that. I love
That's
that.
great.
I love that. And my grandmother was somebody who she drafted everything, like even, birthday cards had a first draft, right? And she always, but something as a writer, what she taught me was like, there's no moral judgment and value in a first draft. Just get the words on the paper, right? You don't have to invite in morality to your first draft of writing. It's just getting the words into the world. Grandma. And I think about that every time I sit down to write. Yeah. No, it was amazing. It was a really, right. All grandmas have wisdom. That should be next podcast. Well, our last question, our most favorite. What was the last thing that you ate and truly loved?
So like I said, I'm from Maryland. I'm in Chicago currently, but when I was home last week for the Maryland leg of the book tour, I had the Maryland style crab cakes, because other places that have it on their menu, I learned the hard way when I first moved to Chicago. It ain't it. It's garbage.
No.
It's trash. Yeah,
it never is.
It tastes like no. Summer's picking crabs and so Maryland crab cakes all the way.
I love that. So what's coming up next for you?
More books, hopefully, working on some book proposals and do more freelance writing, more speaking engagements. And people can always find me and keep up to date with what I'm doing in my weekly newsletter. Sign up at ltinthecity.com.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. And I mean, you are just, not only so inspiring and wonderful, but your energy is so beautiful and you're so brilliant and you just have this wonderful, your heart is so big. Like your mission is really to make people feel good about themselves, right? And make people want to move forward in life and motivate them. And I'm so excited to see your book all over the place. I'm going to go snap photos of it every time I go to the bookstore. And it's been, it's truly, like, as a writer too, it's been amazing to watch you from Twitter, just like saying like, hey, my book's in the world. And then like you're on all these TV shows and everybody's posting about your book. And like, it really is such an inspiration. So just thank you for sharing your story and for everything that you do.
Thank you so much for the support, the encouragement, the Twitter love. Like I appreciate it all. So thank you for also being you.
Thank you for listening to today's story. We're always here and we're proud of you.
A Fresh Story is produced by Fresh Starts Registry, the first and only platform for everything you need to begin again. You can read the show notes and learn more about today's episode at afreshstory.com.
As always, we want to remind our listeners that while we strive to provide accurate and helpful information, we are not medical doctors or mental health professionals. We want to remind you all that the information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice. We highly recommend consulting a qualified healthcare or mental health professional for any concerns or questions you may have. Remember, we are a podcast, but we are not licensed medical professionals. Always consult with your healthcare provider for any medical decisions. And as a gentle reminder, all opinions are our guests and do not necessarily reflect our own.